Okay, so the next thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and set this up so that we can start modeling some of this, and we want to set up some of our projections. So let's actually set up, we've got this cube here, and I'm going to come here to my main perspective for a second. I'm going to click on that little button, and we have the pivot point. We already set that to be on the bottom, but I also want the pivot point to be on the end. So I'm going to hold D as in dog, V as in Victor, grab just that arrow, and I'm going to snap that pivot point to the side, and then let go of D as in dog, V as in Victor. Okay, and so that's going to allow us to kind of follow this bridge so we can scale it up and then just scale it down long ways and so forth. But we're going to do that in a second. I just wanted to get the pivot point set up so that it's ready to go. So the next thing we want to do is we want to set up the actual projections to land on this cube. So the way we're going to do that is if you come up here, you'll see this little shader ball. You can actually also get to that through the menu. So if you go to Window, Rendering Editors, and Hypershade, you can access it right there. But I'm going to do it from here. So I'm going to click on that little shader ball. And that's going to bring us into something like this. Bunch of stuff that we don't need, so I'm going to just use Alt Middle and come off to the side. And so there's a ton of different shaders in here, and a lot of them calculate different things from volumes to light and shadow and all sorts of stuff, and they go different ways about that. So what we want to use is a shader that's not going to use light, right? We want, and that's because we essentially kind of in our map painting, we painted that into here, right? So there's shadows back here, there's lights and things, or whatever we've done painting wise, right? And so we don't want to have Maya calculate additional shadows on this or lighting because it'll mess up our map painting. So we want a shader that doesn't have or won't take any kind of lighting or anything like that. And so that material is called a surface shader. And so by clicking on Maya, we can scroll down until we see surface shader. Also, you can find, if you remember the name, you can also just search for it. So if you just type in surface, you can find it there too. So you could kind of scroll around until you find it, or you could also just, if you remember the name, you could look for it. So I'm going to go ahead and click on surface shader. We'll go ahead and delete that so we get rid of that. Okay. So Alt Middle and then middle mouse button. Yeah. So there's two nodes here. This one over here, you're not going to worry about so much. This is for modelers and things like that if they've done like sculpting or they're going to do some volume type stuff. But this isn't really so much related to map painting. So it's still important. It has to be there, but you can ignore that, so to speak, and let that just kind of work behind the scenes for you. Okay, so the one you need to worry about is this one that's called this Surface Shader 1. And so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the name. And so I'm going to call this ProjCam1 underscore capital SHDR. Okay. And now we need to get that shader onto this cube. Okay, so there's a couple of ways that we could do this. One, we could select the cube, okay, and then come over here and right click and hold, and a menu will pop up. And this top option says assign material to basically whatever is selected, right? So you have to select the cube and then right click and hold on this, and then you can assign that shader to that. Okay, so I'm going to do Control-C, and then I'll show you another way to do this. Another way that you can do this is if you middle mouse drag, you can drag and drop it onto things in the scene. Okay, and so now this shader has been assigned. And that's a couple ways that you could go about assigning things. So now we need to set up this shader. So if I click on this shader, we'll see some attributes for this shader. So we have like color, and I can slide that around, and you can see as I do that it's changing what's happening out here. Okay, so that's just brightness value. You could click on this out color, the actual color swatch, and you could pick different colors. Okay, But this is a matte painting, and so we want to do something a little bit different, right? We don't want to just assign colors. We want to assign a texture as a projection, okay? And so the way we do that is we need to come over here to this little checker box. We're going to click on that checker box. And again, there's a bunch of nodes that do cool stuff, but I really only want you to worry about one right now. And that's this file. Now don't click on it right away because that'll just create just a general texture that wants to use UV mapping. And we're not going to get into UV mapping in here. We're going to set this up through projections. So we need to set this file that's going to call the texture up as a projection. Okay, and so how do we do that? Well, the way you do that is you right click on this, and when you right click on it, you'll see a menu pop up, and there's conveniently something that says create as projection. And so we're going to click on that. And what we can see now, I'm going to move this over here. We can see that it hooked up, right? We had these two nodes before, and now it's hooked up like these 4 nodes right here. Okay. So 2 of these nodes you can, they are important and they do cool stuff. They help control things, but you don't really need to worry about them so much. You can ignore them, and that's this place 3D texture and place 2D texture. Okay, so we're not going to worry about those as much for what we're doing. What you want to concentrate on is this projection 1 and then this file 1. So let's do the file 1 first. So I'm going to click on file 1. And let's come to this folder. I'm going to click on the folder. And again, you can navigate, but I think I've still got all that. Nope, I don't. Let's delete that. And I'm going to go in here. I'm going to copy this file path and hit enter. So let's go ahead and do the one with statues for the moment. And so I'm going to click DMP with statues. Okay, and I'm going to click open. Cool. So now that has set that up, but it's not set it up, and we can actually see that something is happening. Here, it's not quite right yet, but something's happening. What we want to do next is we want to set up how things are being projected onto that cube, because right now, the way things are being projected onto that cube is, and that's a little place 3D texture, is like that's what's controlling this. You don't have to do all this, but that's not how we want to project things. Okay, we want to come over here, and if we click on this projection 1 node, make this bigger. We want to set some things up so that this uses the camera, that projection camera that we made. Okay, so we need to change so let's click on this, and then we want to come to the projection type, and if we click on that, again, a bunch of really cool stuff, but we're only going to focus on one, and that's the perspective one. And that essentially, this perspective option essentially means that you're going to project from a perspective camera. Okay, and so now we need to come down to camera projection attributes. So we set that to project from a camera, and now we need to tell it like what camera and the aspect ratio and stuff like that. So now I'm going to come to lead to camera. I'm going to click on that, and we want to set this to that ProjCam shape 1. So I'm going to set it to that, and then we want to change the fill type from film gate to resolution. You could use film gate, but we're going to use resolution because it's a little easier for a first time go. All right, cool. Now, this does bring up an important point. So there's some stuff that I did for you just automatically. So let me come back here real quick. So if I open up this DMP, let's open that up with Photoshop real quick. Give that just a second to open up. Okay, so I've already done some of this for you with this image. So this image is at an aspect ratio that will work with 1080p. And if we come into image and image size, we can see it's actually 4K, but it's still the aspect ratio of what 1080p is. So making sure that that little chain is on, I could actually change this to 1920. And then you can see that, oh, the height just automatically changes to 1080p since I made sure that that was on. So what this means is, yes, this is like a 4K image, but it's in the same width to height ratio, or the aspect ratio of 1080p. And so that becomes very important, because if this isn't 1080p, this is some other thing or some other aspect ratio, and that's what you want, and you want to render 1080p out of Maya, well, you're going to have some problems if you're working with the resolution gate, because this means that you have to set Maya up to use the aspect ratio of whatever your image is, and then you're going to also have to render from that. So it's good to think about when you're doing your map painting work that things are in the correct aspect ratio. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Again, I've already done some of that for you, so we don't have to think about it, but that's an important thing to be aware of. Okay, so now we need to make sure that Maya is set up to use 1080p, or that aspect ratio. And so how do we go about that? Well, let's do that. So if we come up here, we'll see this little clapper with a gear. And if I click on this little clapper with the gear, we'll see this render settings menu pops up. And we want to use comment, or use the comment tab, right? There's a bunch of tabs, but we want to make sure that we're in comment for this. So there's a few other things that I'll just go ahead and set up for now. I'll set up the type of image format, because at some point we're going to want to render this out. And so let's render this out to TIFFs. Okay. And then let's come down to frame and animation extension. So there's name.extension. So what this would do is, like frame 1, it would render and then save it out as like DMP. Then you go to frame 2 and it would render, and then it would save it out again as DMP.tiff. And so that would essentially overwrite the first frame. So we need this to be name.frameNumber.extension. And so the way we do that is to change this to name.pound.extension. Okay, so you just want to change that to that. You then have this frame padding option. It's just set to 4, which typically I do leave it at that. But what that is that for that pound, that's like 0001, 0002, and so forth. So this would be like DMP 0001.tiff, DMP.0002.tiff, and so forth. Now you could change this to like 5, and it would have an extra 0, or 3, and it would have less zeros, right? So that's how you control that. Frame range, I don't know what our frame range will be. I'll go ahead and set it to 120 in frame for now. We haven't created a renderable camera, so we'll want to change that later. But we'll leave it at perspective for now. And then for presets, we'll see that there's this HD 540, and that's actually the same aspect ratio as 1080p. So this is actually still okay aspect ratio wise, but I do want to change this. So if I click on a preset, I want to change this to HD 1080. So if we click on that, we'll see that it changed these numbers. Technically, you can come in and type in the numbers that you want here. But for 1080p, Maya does give you the aspect ratio for that. So that's the actual width, the height to width pixel ratio. And so that's what that's in regards to. So for example, if I change this to 3000, you'll see that number change, right? Okay. All right, cool. So this is all set back. We've got the correct aspect ratio. And now we're ready to kind of start working things. So let's do this. Let's scale this up. And let's move it over. I'm going to scale it up some more. And so it's hard to see from this angle, like if it's really where I want it to be. So we can still work from this angle once things kind of get flushed out a little bit more, but I kind of want to look through this camera for a sec. So I'm going to go to Panels, Perspective, and Proj Cam. And that actually wasn't too far off. I'm going to move that right there for a second. And then I'm going to scale that up. Cool. And then I'm going to just move it back here. And it looks like it's kind of getting off. But that could be distortions on the bridge. And there could actually even be some distortions in our photo and so forth. But we'll make it work. So I'm going to come back to our main perspective view. And I'm just going to move this back a bit more. Kind of off screen. And then I'm going to right click. And again, the components that you really want to worry about are vertex, edges, and face. And then object mode, obviously. I'm going to go to face. And I'm going to click on a face. And I'm just going to move that along the side of that bridge. And so let's go to Panels, Perspective, and Proj Cam. And let's see how that's working. And it's actually going through our image a little bit. So I'm going to zoom out. And so we want this image to scoot back a little bit. So let's look at that real quick. So I'm going to go to Proj Cam Shape 1. I'm going to go to the Image Plane 1 tab. And I want to change this depth. So I click the image plane here. I'm in my Channel Box Layer Editor. And let's change that to 300. And it's just going to scoot that back a bit. It's still going to look the same from this camera. So if I go to Proj Cam 1, it's still going to look the same. But yeah. Okay, cool. I think that's okay. And let's zoom in a little bit. Let's click on our camera. Vertical film offset. Okay, so from here, let's looks like we're going to need to adjust some of this. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to come back here to our main perspective camera. And with this cube selected, I'm in my poly modeling tab. I'm going to come here to this multi-cut tool. And if I hold Control down, we'll see that we can put in different edge loops. And so by holding Control down, when I look at that, you can see like it's made a loop all the way around. And so that's kind of what we want. And so I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to right click and I'm going to come to Edge. And I'm going to click F to kind of zoom in on that edge. And so I can actually see the sky a little bit. And so I want to pull this down and back a bit, just so that that matches right there. Okay. Now let's go back to our other edge. Let's click on that. I'm going to pull that up and then down, just so that it reaches that a little bit. Okay. And I don't know how far we're getting off, so I'm going to come back to the other camera. So Perspective and Proj Cam 1. And yeah, it looks like that's off a little bit. So let's come back to our main perspective. I'm going to click on that edge and pull that up. It looks like there. I'm looking at this. So we'll want to drop some edge loops, maybe right around here and here. Click that. Because there was like this little. Okay, I want to move this whole edge, the whole edge loop, down here. So I'm going to double click just one of those edges and you'll see that it gives us all of them. I'm just going to move that over. Okay, and I'm going to click off and then just click one edge. I'm going to pull that down. Now the tricky thing is it looks like this drops off pretty quickly. So I'm going to get my multi-cut tool, control click again, back to my move tool, grab just that top edge. And we're going to move that to something like that. Okay. And now let's see what we can see here. Pull that down a bit. Control click again with the multi-cut tool, back to the move tool. So this is the thing with like whatever skill you're doing, like whether it's in Maya, whether it's in Photoshop, it's like you end up doing a lot of the same stuff like over and over and over, right? So we drop in edge loops. Maybe we should just drop one in right here. Just to make sure. So you drop in like an edge loop, then you go back to your move tool, then you select like that edge and pull that. Actually, that looks like that was already in a good place. So yeah, let's go back to our main Proj Cam. Let's right click and go to object mode. See how that's feeling. So another thing, like I have to click on the object to be able to see the wireframe, or if I click off, I don't see it. So there's this little option right here called wireframe unshaded. I'm going to go ahead and turn that on. And then let's click on our Proj Cam. Let's just kind of zoom in and see how things are matching up. So it looks like I can see things are off a little bit right there and then right there. So let's drop in. Oops. All right, so Maya just crashed on me and I'm picking things back up. So I'm trying to remember kind of where I was at, what I was doing. So I think where we were going with this is we were looking just to make sure everything was working edgewise here. As you can see, like things are moving super fast. I just need to come up here and click that a couple times, get that to that little wedge, and that change because things crashed. So I'm gonna go back to 0, and now I can kind of move around a little bit better. Okay, let's take a look. I'm gonna zoom out a little bit. So things actually don't look too bad. Maybe off a hair in these areas, but that's really not too bad. So one thing we could do is we could select this object, then go to our multi-cut, drop in a loop right there. Go back to object mode. Looks like we were right there. So back to the multi-cut and do control and drop in another edge loop. Okay. So I'm going to come back to my main perspective view. And let's take a look at some of these areas. So I'm going to click right there. Drop that down here. And you can actually kind of see, like, if you look right here, you can kind of see like the edge, like that sky or whatever. So we'll drop that down. And again, these things don't have to be perfect. We just want to get it as close as possible. Okay. All right, cool. So now if I kind of line my camera up to match that camera, right click and go to object mode. Now we can kind of get a sense of what that's going to look like in 3D a little bit. We still got a lot of work to do, but it's kind of getting there. We can see the beginnings of some parallax. So now the next thing we want to do is build like these little things. Now, honestly, I would probably want to like extrude these sections in But because this is so dark, I'm going to see if we can't leave this as flat, because this is so dark where these little passageways are. We probably aren't going to see a lot in there anyways. So, but I'm going to go ahead and model these little foreground elements. Let's go ahead and get some of that going. So let's make another cube. And same process, D is in dog, V is in Victor. Grab that top arrow. X is in Xavier. Move that onto the top grid. I'm going to go ahead and click this snowflake just to zero that out. I also want the pivot point on this side, so I'm going to hold D as in dog, V as in Victor. Grab just this little side arrow and we can snap that over. Then let go of D as in dog and V as in Victor. And now I'm going to just hold just V as in Victor, and that's going to allow me to snap that to like this over here. Cool. So the next thing I think I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to my hypershade. And I'm going to assign this projection shader to this. And we'll close that. And now I'm going to move this cube over. I'm going to scale it up. And I'm going to click F to kind of frame it. Let's just do something like that for a second, just so I can see like where this comes out to. So maybe right around there. Looks like this edge needs to come in a bit because it's kind of skinny right there. And then it's kind of fatter here. So I'm going to pull this edge out so we get to that corner. And then let's come back to our multi-cut tool. And let's drop an edge loop right around there. Come back to our move tool. And let's grab this edge and then let's scale it in. Kind of tricky to see exactly what's going on here. We can scale that around there. And then I'm going to come to this right here. And I'm going to pull that down a bit. And I'm going to pull this edge up. So I'm just kind of trying to find where this piece is in 3D space. So let's come out. Maybe something along these lines. And it looks, I'm going to kind of do an experimentation here. Looks like if I grab this, put it there, that's kind of what's looking like is happening. Yeah, let's do that. There might have been some weird clone stamping kind of work that I might have done in there. So let's pull that out a little bit. Yeah, I think something like that's going to work. So now let's kind of come back. And a lot of times I like to kind of get to this little camera angle roughly and just kind of do some tests. I'm going to turn that off a little bit, and now I'm going to see like how that's looking. Cool. So what I'm going to do is, since I already kind of got this banged out a little bit, I'm going to just do Control D as in dog, and I'm just going to move that. We're probably going to have to make some changes, but I'm going to move that roughly into shape or position for this guy. And then I'm going to come to right click and go to vertex mode. And we'll move some of this in. Grab some of that. We'll move that up. And let's see. And so it's just kind of fudging this until you kind of get something that, click F to kind of zoom into that area until you kind of like. And don't forget these little planes, right? You can move things all around on these little planes. Make sure we're getting the edge there. Cool. So now to come around to where that camera is at. Click the camera and click F. Okay. So now if we move in, we'll start to see that we're getting a little bit of parallax. And as you can see, like right as we move around, we can see like that doubling. That's when we're going to want to actually project that other texture onto that so that we can kind of get rid of any of that doubling. Okay. I'm going to duplicate this one. And let's move that one over. Looks like that comes right out to about here. And I'm going to right click, I'm going to go to vertex. And as you can see, like this model is just, these models are like super rough. They're like anything too spectacular. Oops, we don't want the ground one. So I'm going to hold Control, clear those just so we have, actually we do want these ground ones. Never mind that. Grab all that. I just want to move, let's grab this ground plane and just kind of move some of that over. Control Z, I'm not liking that either. Let's grab this top one. We'll just move these one at a time until we kind of get these in the rough place that we like. Let's grab this front stuff. And I'm going to click F to kind of frame this. I'm going to pull that out. Something like that. And then I'll just grab these little vertices and kind of pull those out a little bit too. Looks like we're getting off a little bit, like I can see a little space. So I'm going to pull this down a bit. We could pull this down a bit. It's probably not a big deal, but yeah, so something like that. And again, I love doing these tests because you can just kind of start to see your map painting starting to come to life. We're starting to get like some 3D feel to this. Cool. Let's duplicate this one. And then we're going to pull this one. Trying to see what's kind of happening back there. It's roughly right there. Grab these vertices. I'm just going to grab that whole tip. Kind of pull that in. And then I'm going to pull that one down. And pull this up. Maybe I'll zoom in, see what we can see. Okay. And I'm trying to keep things on the ground plane, by the way, so that things aren't like going like this or that or whatever, as much as possible. Okay. So that's that one. It looks like we've got another one. So I'm going to duplicate that and move that. Looks like it's, scale that up a bit. Yeah, there it is. I'm going to grab those front elements. Grab these vertices on the top. Since I don't have these other, oh, I see kind of what's going on. Let's do this. Just pull this one down because it looks like there's almost like 2 peaks for this one. So let's drop down something like that and something like that. And then back to our move tool. And then pull this other one up for the other peak. And we'll move that down a little bit. So something like that. We're just kind of roughing it in. Okay. And honestly, it looks like we could extend this face. So I'm going to select that face. I'm going to hold Shift so that I can extrude. And I'm just going to push that along a bit. I'm just going to push it and do it quite a bit. Okay. So now we can see the beginnings of our map painting. Cool. So we'll pick it up in the next video and we'll continue with our projection work.